Well, welcome again to the fifth and second to last panel of our Remembering Judi Bari exhibit here in Mendocino. It's been it's fun to watch or amazing to watch the evolution of government consciousness where, one year we're the arch enemies of the county and now we got our own museum exhibit. And Mendocino County also made May 24th Judi Bari Day, as did the city of Arcata, as did the city of Oakland.
All right.
So, thanks to John McCowan for introducing that resolution. Today we're going to talk a lot about the day of the bombing itself, although we can go a couple days before and a couple days after, and there will be Q&A afterwards, or if anybody wants to add or share something in addition to what we have to say. Before I start my little spiel, I'm going to introduce our panelists, all the way from Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, Betty Ball. And Betty, I wasn't originally going to come, but then I think she said to herself that she's just not going to miss this.
Yay! Absolutely. Yeah.
And then to Betty's left is Karen Pickett.
Yay!
As I forgot to mention about Betty, I'm sure many of you know, but she is the co-founder of the Mendocino Environmental Center. Betty Ball is the center of our universe for well over a decade, whether it was the Bay Area, Sonoma, all the way in northern Humboldt, or Garberville, and certainly Ukiah and Willits. Betty and Gary, her late great husband, were the center of it all. So the great networker, embraced everybody. I always say this about Betty. If Betty didn't like you, there was really something wrong with you. She liked everybody. And then Karen Pickett was with Judi Bari when she passed away. And great confidant of Judi's. And Karen, most importantly, for this particular panel, was the #1 support person for Judi and I, and Earth First in general, after the bombing. I mean, just was
absolutely
without question. And I actually think I lived at Karen's house for about 2 months or a month and a half after the bombing, and so she should get an award just for that. And then Pam Davis, who I very affectionately refer to as Old Growth Pam. Pam was one of Judi Bari's best friends. Pam can fix a car, and Judi was mechanically...
And have extra parts and it still works.
Yeah. And Pam and Judi worked together in various endeavors, both political and also just...
With
hammers, exactly. And so Pam is one of the many strong women that Judi liked to call her good friends. I'm also going to give a special acknowledgement to Tanya Brennan, who's in our front row right here, another confidant of Judi's, and who steered the Redwood Justice Fund, which Judi helped found, and which Judi donated half of her winnings after the bombing. And Tanya is here as well. So thank you for coming, Tanya. And Tanya also helped manage the lawsuit. I mean, there's a lot. I'm not doing anybody here justice as to what we've all done. I'm going to start and give everybody a chance to and gather their thoughts. I was talking to somebody just a couple days ago, and it might have been one of you, and they said, "Oh, I remember where they told me that they remembered where they were when the bomb went off in the car," and I responded, "I remember where I was too." Yeah. And it was a twist of fate that brought me to be inside that vehicle. I wasn't supposed to be in the car that day. Judi and I had split up as romantic partners, and that was actually the first night that we ever spent on the road together where we slept in separate houses. It wasn't just separate beds, it was separate houses. I don't really blame her, because George Shook, our banjo player who was traveling with us at the time, and I got to sleep on some rickety bunk beds at the Seeds of Peace house in Berkeley, right on the corner of Alcatraz in California. And Judi went for the bougie house over in Oakland at a man named Dave Chemnitzer's, and he offered her a private bedroom, and So she was very comfortable over there. But in the morning, Judi and I needed to get together because we had rehearsing to do, we had a grant to write, and we had a slideshow to argue about. And so in the morning, George had a broken banjo. He needed a part for his banjo. He needed a nut for the head. So he borrowed my van because Judi was commuting back and forth to some of these events. So these were Redwood Summer organizing events. Because of the and let me backtrack for a moment. Because of the massive amounts of death threats that we received, Judi and I decided to get out of Dodge, but we weren't just going to flee. We decided to go on a road show to organize for Redwood Summer because the whole point was to bring college kids and others, of course, to the Redwoods in the spirit of Freedom Summer in Mississippi, which also brought college kids down to the Deep South back in the early 60s to fight for the voting rights and fight Jim Crow laws and racism down in the Deep South. And we were also planning to bring college kids, so it's like, hey, we need to get out of Mendocino and Humboldt where we're getting all these threats. Let's go on the road. And I had booked 15 or so colleges. They were all free events. A lot of the CSU and the UC system, as well as some private universities and some individual events from Sacramento State to San Luis Obispo. I mean, I still have the schedule that we didn't make, but the whole idea was for us to do this show, so we weren't just going to flee, we were going to organize and get out of town. So when we went down to Oakland, and Judi was commuting back and forth because she had 2 kids, and didn't always have an ex to count on to watch the kids, so she would have to come home at night. But on the night of May 23rd, the day before the bombing, Judi did get her husband Mike to watch the children, and she was going to spend the night in the Berkeley, Oakland area. And on May 23rd, we did the final organizing planning for Redwood Summer. We got all 4 major demonstrations together, and we got our nonviolence code was twinkled on, and meaning agreed upon, consented on, and people took on roll seats apiece, was going to do the logistics. Industrial Workers of the World was there, in the body of Utah Phillips and others, going to do the labor outreach, and of course Earth First, the direct action. So that was a big deal. And it was that night that I stayed at Seats of Peace House, and Judi went across town to Oakland. So, there is a question, and I'm not going to get too far into who bombed Judi Bari. In some ways, I wish we had done one more event where we talked about who bombed Judi Bari. But I will throw a few tidbits in that when Judi went across town, the question is, how did somebody know her car was there? So either she was being followed, or there was somebody who was informing the law enforcement of her whereabouts and where she was going. And I'm not going to point any fingers or name people. I'm just going to say that there's only 2 ways that somebody could have known her car was there, and we do believe the bomb was put in her car while she slept in Oakland. So the morning of May 24th, George borrowed my van, and I got into a car with Shannon Marr, who was a Seeds of Peace activist, and she drove me from the Seeds of Peace house across town to where Dave Kennitzer and was putting up Judi Bari. I got there, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. I went out for eggs. I went and bought eggs and breakfast fixings, came back. Shannon and Dave worked on a grant to the Grateful Dead for food money, which we got, $5,000 grant from the Rex Foundation. And meanwhile, Judi Bari and I were downstairs having one of our glorious fights. This one, that there was too many men in my slideshow. And I said, there's just women in it. Yeah, but you name the men, you don't name the women. It's like, no, I do name, no, you don't. And then that picture of Doug Peacock in front of the American flag. No American flags in the slideshow. That's gonna go, right? Yeah, and I'm not exaggerating. And so we were having a blowout, and then finally, then we played 2 songs to kind of bring down the temperature, because Judi used to say that she says it's really hard to hate you when we sing, So and so we sang a couple songs to bring down the temperature. We sang "Where Are We Going to Work When the Trees Are Gone," and the last song we sang before we got blown up was "Turkeys at the Mech." We just love to sing that. There's a lot of songs Judi and I like to sing that aren't necessarily going to be your favorites. Anyway, so then it came time to go back to Seeds of Peace House. And there was Shannon Marr, who had driven me to Dave's house, and there was Judi Bari. And they were literally parked 2 cars uphill with Shannon, 2 cars downhill for Judi in front of Dave's house. And I didn't want to be disrespectful of Shannon and not ride with her because she'd driven me. On the other hand, Judi was my angry ex, and did I really want to get in that car? So, but being kind of the spiritual guy that I am, I stood in between 2 cars, stared right between them, and called out to the universe, who should I ride with? And Judi likes to say, the universe answered. She said, me. And that's how I got in Judi Bari's car that day. And so Shannon, we got to follow Shannon back to Seeds of Peace because we actually don't know how to get there. And there she is zipping around Oakland at very, 19-year-old speed. And Judi and I are all of a sudden talking about, God, how fast Shannon's going. Can we keep up with her? And then as we turned a right turn onto Park Boulevard, just about to get on the 580, reality was changed forever. And at first I thought I was dead. I mean, I had no frame of reference to know what I was experiencing. My ears were ringing. It turned out it was the sound of my eardrums flapping, like that. And there was all kinds of glass and there was things, but I didn't have whiplash. I actually was not unconscious. And I realized I don't have whiplash, so we didn't hit something. And I thought of Brian Wilson, who had got run over by a train early in just the previous year at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. I thought about the fact that Judi and I had been rear-ended by a logging truck just 6 or 8 months before, in August of 1989, when we were traveling to the coast, just in Philo. We were rear-ended by a logging truck, by Redwood Coast Trucking. I thought about that, and then I thought maybe we'd been shot, but there wasn't any blood, from a gunshot. And then 2 kids come coming out of the school, and they go, "It's a bomb! It's a bomb!" And that is how I knew it was a bomb. We were bombed right in front of the Oakland High School sports yard, the complex where they play sports. And at that point, I turned and looked at Judi. First I wiggled my fingers and toes, made sure I was okay, and then this is all a matter of seconds. And then I turned to Judi, and I could see how hurt she was. Well, actually, I couldn't see how hurt she was because most of her injuries were internal. She had a shattered pelvis. She had a partially paralyzed right leg with extensive nerve damage. She had intestinal damage. Her intestines were damaged, and she had her coccyx and her sacrum were dislocated 4 inches to the right. I put my finger there, like that far. Her 2 lower vertebrae were permanently off that far to the right. And as I mentioned, she was impaled in a car seat spring. And one of the things that happened last week was Bill Simpich, one of our founding attorney for the lawsuit, sent over some last stuff, some bomb materials that he had neglected to give me. I have most of the stuff, some of which has appeared here in the museum. The car was left to the museum by Judi herself, but I also had a lot of the stuff. And if you want to take a look at this car seat, you'll see the car seat springs that she was impaled on. I don't know if I can reach down here. Like, this is what spiraled up into Judi's rear end. Oops, Daisy. And that took a long time to get out of her. And she had to lay on that in the hospital, the hole, like a 2-inch cavity in her butt. She had to lay on that because she was in traction. So her leg was up, and she was forced to lay on her backside for 6 weeks. To give you an idea, if modern medicine had been here, she would have certainly have died. But Judi, who was never at a loss for words, ever, was being wheeled into the ICU, being operated on, and an Oakland police officer, kind of a foot soldier, a foot cop, with a little notepad, a little yellow pad, said to her, "Who did this to you?" And it turns out, as we learned in the lawsuit, that a deathbed confession is actually a legal term, and it holds more weight than just an ordinary, talking about who did it. And this was considered a deathbed statement. And he said, "Who did this to you?" And Judi, never at a loss for words, got the one word out that said it all. She said, "Timber." And then they took her into the operating room. And that's what's written right there in the police report. Excuse me. After that, she was brought into the ICU. She was handcuffed to the bed. She was next to other prisoners, not allowed to see anybody or hug anybody for days, except for maybe her lawyer. Her parents eventually made it there, but this was not, this was torture after the torture. At my end, I was still in one piece, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. And in show business, we have an expression: the show must go on. And I was actually okay enough, even though my clock had been rung, to go and sing that night at Santa Cruz. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to make it there. I'm going to tell everybody what happened to us, and it's going to, it's this really important event that I got to make it to. And I noticed, kind of strangely, that the paramedics were treating me really rudely, like, get out of the car. And I said, no, take Judi first. No, shut up and get out. And they were just super rude to me, and I didn't know why. And then I got to the hospital, and the doctor pulled the glass out of my eye and stitched me up a little bit over here. I had some burns, but I was basically in one piece. I had 2 busted eardrums. And that's when, but my eye was patched up because I had scratched cornea and I had glass in my eye. And so this eye was patched up and this eye was pretty closed, right? And so these 2 guys in suits that I could kind of barely make out walked in. And they said, "Are you Darryl Cherney?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "Who are you?" And they reached into their pockets and they flopped down their badges. And I knew that anybody who would show their badges to a blind man had to be the FBI. And it was Agent Stockton Buck and Agent Phil Sena. And they asked me who did this, and I had a laundry list of death threats we'd received, including some names of people. And they said, they just waved their hands and they said, "Look, we can tell if this was your bomb, so why don't you just confess, make it easy on all of us, and get it over with." And I said the same words to them that Judi later on said to the Oakland police when they asked her, when she was conscious enough to talk to. I said, "I want to see my lawyer." Those are the magic words, always, gotta say them. So then they brought me, after they were finished with me, the cops brought me to the Oakland police station. And I was put into a little room with linoleum floor, uncomfortable chairs, and a little light hanging from a thing like they have in cop shows. And they kept me there for 7 hours, from 4 to 11 p.m. No bathroom, no food. And I'd bang on the door because I had to go to the bathroom, and they'd come in and yell at me, and I'd yell right back at them. "You get out there and go find out who bombed us. What am I doing in here?" And I was louder than that, I can assure you. And then finally at 11 p.m. they bought me a freaking sandwich from the slot machine, and they asked me if I wanted to talk, and I said, "I want to find out," and they asked me to sign something, a waiver. And I don't advise anybody to do this, but I had and have a very good legal mind, and I wrote down, I'm going to do more than talk to you. I want to help you find out who did this. You need to go out there and wrote that down on the paper. You need to find out who did this. And then they started to, ask me where I lived and and where I was. And there was at some point I was just very chatty. I wasn't really that badly hurt. I mean, I was hurt, but I wasn't that badly hurt. And there was one point when Lieutenant Sims looks at me and he says, "You just don't fit the profile of a bomber." And I looked at him and I said, "No shit, Sherlock." Yeah, the best use of that sentence ever. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were going to make a decision whether to arrest me or not. And I was kind of on the edge of my uncomfortable chair. And they said, "We're going to arrest you." And I was like, I'm not allowed to say that on museum video. Karen told me that. But I did. I cursed. And then they put me in a holding cell, and I really couldn't see hardly anything at all. There was only 2 white guys and a whole bunch of black people in those holding cells. And what was really amazing about that moment, I don't share this too much, was that the African American people in that room were actually kind of singing to each other. They were doing a cross between hip hop and rap and music, and it sounded beautiful. I mean, it sounded like a rainforest. It was like just this beautiful sound. I was listening. But the other white guy who'd been arrested for sleeping in the airport and being belligerent, he was like, "I don't belong in here. You need to let me out. What am I doing in here?" It was like he was harshing my mellow. And it was that was just a moment in time. And then they put me into a different holding cell before they put me in the final place they were going to put me. And it was there, in this larger room, maybe it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, that I looked up from my bench and I saw it. The payphone. The holy grail of Darryl's world. The phone. And back in those days, we didn't have cell phones. I knew the number of every single member of the media by heart, without question. I was a media person. I organized protests and I called the press. I wrote the press releases. We put them in the mail and we mailed them out. And so there it was. And I started calling. The first interview I did was the San Jose Mercury News with Linda Goldston. And the second interview I did was with K-Mud. And I'm kind of kicking myself that I let my computer drown out for a little bit. I'm going to play this for you and then I'm going to turn it over to Betty. So this will probably, go out in the middle, but I'm going to play it anyway for as long as I can. This is the unedited, oh come on you, the unedited interview from jail with K-Mud. And here it is.
There we go. So what happened, Darryl? Well, Judi, George, and myself have been on tour for about 5 days. We're on an organizing drive for Redwood Summer, and we have been showing slides, playing music, banjo, guitar, and fiddle, and Judi's been giving some incredible speeches. And we had taken a day off. We had just finished typing up a grant proposal to get some food money for Redwood Summer. And we were leaving a friend's house in Judi's car, myself and Judi. We were going on our way to University of Santa Cruz to play music down there. And about 5 minutes after leaving David's house, our friend, I heard a crack. And then my whole head started to ring like a sitar in my head, like... And the car came to a screeching halt. The first thought in my mind was, oh no, not again. Because last August we had been rear-ended by a log truck without ever seeing it coming. And here we are again, me and Judi in a car. But this time my head was bleeding and I knew I had a seatbelt on and I couldn't figure out how come my head was bleeding if I hadn't hit the windshield. And then I heard somebody scream out, it's a bomb. There was a bomb. And then it all made sense that someone had tried to kill us. And I took a look over to Judi, and she was slumped in her seat, screaming in pain, but as far as I could tell, her body was in one piece, albeit somewhat broken. At that point, we were both ordered to stay seated. Ambulances came, and we were taken away. She had a broken pelvis.
And that's as far as we're going to get because my batteries have died. I'm so sorry. I really blew that. But that gives you a sense of the feeling of what it was like. That is from jail. Mm-hmm. I do remember that when I was in jail, they actually treated me with kid gloves. And there was actually this giant, tall sergeant, like really tall guy, and he comes up to me and says, you know, we're treating you like with kid gloves in here. I'm like, yeah, you better. I shouldn't even be here in the first place. And then at one point he came out to me and he said, some media wants to interview you. And I said, well, who? And it was almost like a comedy show. He took out a piece of paper and like rolled down to the floor and up the aisle. And I'm like, I'll tell you what, you don't want the press to come in here, and I'm not really into talking to the press right now, one of those rare moments, right? And so I said, one interview. I'll talk to the Oakland Tribune, the local paper. And I did that with Robert Lopez. And it was a very good interview. And then it was Douglas Horngrad, who had represented us at the Golden Gate Bridge climb, which was only 30 days earlier, who sent his legal team and to represent me. And Susan Jordan, the late Susan Jordan from Mendocino County, represented Judi. And 5 days later, they let me out. No charges. The whole frame job was done by the FBI and the Oakland Police, but the district attorney, Chris Carpenter, he wasn't with the program. And we actually requested Judi be kept under police custody because we needed her to have a bodyguard. We needed to know that if somebody wasn't going to try again, I mean, this was real. Somebody just tried to kill us, and they didn't succeed, and we didn't even know whether they were trying to kill both of us or one of us. At this time, everything was a blur. And it's, being I got in the car by accident, we'll never really know what their plan was. One thing I can tell you about the FBI from my readings on them is they don't improv well. When they do, they're not cops in the street who go around chasing people. They make a plan. And if something goes wrong with their plan, like Waco, or Ruby Ridge, or they get shot. And so all of a sudden now, the FBI, I got in the car. Judi didn't die, and I got in the car. And there I am blabbing to the press. And so that's when they came up, I believe, somebody came up with, and I believe it was the feds, with the Lord's Avenger letter that took credit for bombing us. But I think originally, and we will never know, the plan was to bomb Judi and kill her, and then arrest me, her recently ex-lover who she was fighting with on a daily nasty basis, than to arrest me for murdering Judi. But that we'll never know. Judi and I talked about that along with a whole bunch of other scenarios that we discussed, but we'll never know because it turned out the way it was. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Betty Ball, who I just worship the ground that you walk on. I'm so happy you were here, Betty. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the day of the bombing and anything else you want to share. And it was, by the way, it was Betty Ball who introduced Judi Bari and I. So you can blame her.
So, meanwhile, at the MEC, not knowing what had just transpired, but being aware of very many weird things that had been going on. One thing is, lately, I've been hearing a lot about paraquat. Anybody else has been hearing about paraquat lately? We had very many strange people coming into the MEC, and two of the people said that they were doing a research project on paraquat, and they thought that the MEC would be interested in it, and I said, we've really got a lot going on right now. I don't think that we can take on the paraquat issue. But they kept insisting, and they kept insisting on coming into the MEC every day, looking through the magazines and newsletters and whatnot that we had on our literature shelves, and then they would go out to the library and come back with more information about paraquat. So before I knew I was going to come and be on the panel, I started hearing again about paraquat, a lot, getting people to file claims for being injured by paraquat. Anyway, so that was just another weird coincidence, and my introduction to the pesticide, the herbicide paraquat. And so this particular day, the weird people didn't show up. They weren't there like they had been. And around noontime, the phone rang, and I answered it, Mendocino Environmental Center, and this voice on the other end said, I am so-and-so. I am a paramedic at Highland Hospital, and I need to talk to you about Judi Bari. I said, what about Judi Bari? And he said, there's been a horrible incident that happened. There's been a bombing. And I said, I do not believe you. We have had so many bomb threats and death threats and everything going on. I believe you're playing a cruel hoax on me. I do not believe you. And he said, no, this is for real. I need to let you know. Judi was in this horrible situation that just happened, and she was able to give us the phone number here for the Environmental Center. He said, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you my name. I want you to look up the phone number for Highland Hospital, call the hospital, and ask for me so you can confirm I'm who I say that I am. So Joy DeClaire was in the back office at the MEC that day working on Forest Forever mailing lists. She overheard my conversation, and she said, do you want me to look up the phone number? And I said, yes. Those were the days when we still had phone books. And so she looked up the phone number, and I dialed the number, and I asked for this man, whose name I remembered for years, and now I can't remember it. And he in fact did come to the phone and said, yes, I needed to confirm with you that I am who I say I am, and that your friend has just been bombed. And I said, tell me more about her so I'll know that you're telling the truth. So they gave me her birth date, which was 10 years before Judi was born. And I said, see, you don't know what you're talking about. I do not believe you. And so I said, and then who was in the car with her? And they said, we don't know. Some man was in the car with her, but we don't know who it was. So that didn't reassure me much anyway, but they kept talking long enough to convince me that something was really wrong, and that they were taking Judi to surgery, and I could call back in a couple of hours and get an update status report. So that was my introduction to the fact of what was going on. But we knew nothing. I mean, I didn't know who was in the car with Judi. I mean, she left the net with Utah Phillips in the car with her. And I didn't know if it was Utah, if it was Darryl. So I didn't know who it was. And we didn't know much else. I called Karen Pickett immediately. That was the day I forever memorized Karen's phone number. And she wasn't home, but Kelby was there. And we got the message to Karen, who got over to the hospital. And then, and only then, were we able to get any kind of information of what was going on. It was just like we had no idea. The media was beginning to call us, and we didn't know anything. We didn't have any information. So we were relying on the media to update us, and we weren't getting too far with that at that moment. And then, it being a Thursday, we had a class of special needs students that came every Thursday to do volunteer work at the NEC. And I didn't have time to take the teacher aside and explain what was going on. So they came in, and I was able to get the teacher aside and said, we've got this horrible incident going on. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but it's really awful. Why don't you finish this project you were working on last week with the envelopes, and then just leave. We didn't want to let on to the kids that something was really terribly wrong. So we got them busy for a little while, and then they left. And then enter Nick Wilson. Nick came into the NEC. He has been doing flyover photograph of the Garcia.
Not Garcia, but everything else on the coast.
Yeah.
Big River, Noyo River.
Right, and doing all this flyover photography that we had been waiting and waiting to be able to see. And I tried my best to pay attention to the pictures that Nick was showing me. And I finally had to say, Nick, I am really, really sorry. But evidently we were just bombed, and I don't know what's going on, and I need to talk to you again some other time. Soon, but some other time. It was horrible. I really hated to send Nick away after we'd been waiting for this documentation that he had gathered for us. But obviously that was not the time to do that. And then we started hearing from the media, and I got a phone call from Mike Sweeney, who said, get out to the house. You've got to remove anything that the FBI might want. They're going to be there soon. I can assure you they're going to be there soon. So I called Gary, who was at work at California Yurt Company, and told him he needed to get to the NEC immediately. And so he came, and we left the NEC. Joy Claire was still there, and we went up to the house, grabbed anything that we thought looked like would be of interest to the FBI, put it in the car, and took it to a safe house where it was safely stashed away. And I called the Met from there, and they said, you've got to get back over here. KCBS is going to be calling you in 10 minutes for an interview. So that was the way the day proceeded. And then a little while after that, Susan Jordan called and said that she was going to represent Judi, and that we should get people together throughout the county and have vigils. So we proceeded to do that. So that was my day. That was my day to learn when I learned about the bombing.
At least.
Yeah.
Betty? Betty's Dick. As I recall, we were going through the photos and talking, and then when the phone rang and you got the news for the first time.
Well, that could, yeah. I think it was when the guy called me back again. Yeah.
Possibly.
So, yeah.
But you didn't say anything about it to me up to that point. So.
Yeah, so anyway, it was, it was a moment that I which had much rather been looking at Nick's photographs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask, thank you, Betty. And as I mentioned, Karen Pickett was our #1 support person by far. And so I'm going to let her take it away and talk about her day on May 24th and anything else you want to add.
Okay. So picking up where Betty left off about calling me from the MEC, and actually just to kind of add a preamble, the meeting the night before, because I was at that meeting at the Seeds of Peace House on the 23rd, and it was I saw it as kind of a seminal meeting because we laid out a plan for the whole summer, and there were, there had been a lot of meetings going on in Mendocino and Humboldt County, and we had some meetings in the Bay Area, and we were setting up infrastructure for Redwood Summer to have the Bay Area be an organizing base. But this was when we really had to launch it off the ground, and not only was it at Seeds of Peace House, and they were key, but Utah Phillips was there, as Darryl said. Dakota Sid Clifford was there. Mike Roselle was there. Of course, Judi and Darryl and George Shook, and I was there. So we were, it was a pretty amazing group to come together, and it felt, afterwards, it felt like, okay, we're ready to go. And I had been talking to Judi a lot on the phone about organizing for Redwood Summer, but we made plans at that meeting to get together in person for either breakfast or lunch when she was on her way back from Santa Cruz, and because we really needed to have a meeting in person. And so that was going to be the next time that I would see her. So I didn't talk to them in the morning because I didn't need to. I just went to work. And so when Betty called my house, and she said Kelpie was there, was my roommate at the time, and was doing the Prop 130 petition drive in the East Bay.
The Forest Forever.
Forest Forever ballot initiative. And so Kelpie called me at work at the Ecology Center, and it was a very short phone call because we knew next to nothing except that a bomb had exploded, and Judi and Darryl were in the car, and it was bad. And so I basically dropped the phone and yelled something to my coworkers about going to the hospital, bomb, and I just ran out of there and headed to my car. And there was one of my coworkers, Carol O'Neill, bless her heart, thankfully had the presence of mind, because I had said bomb hospital. She said, somebody should go with you, and she chased me. And then just stayed with me the rest of that day, and was a really good thing, and it had not occurred to me that maybe I shouldn't go down there by myself. So I was the first person at the hospital. I mean, pretty shortly after, it didn't happen instantaneously. The people converged because no cell phones, no internet, etc. But it was because of these phone calls. There was nobody else there except hospital personnel and the cops when I got there, and so I immediately talked to the doctors and nurses, and they said that Judi was in emergency surgery, Darryl was being treated in the ER, and so I was trying to get information about how badly Judi was injured. And so I told them that I was her sister, because I knew that any biological family was far away, and she is my sister.
Yep.
So they were giving me a little bit of information. They didn't know much at that point because she was in surgery and would be assessed when she came out of surgery. And so we're talking, and then the cops started talking to me, and they were asking, who are these people? Where were they just prior to this event? Where were they going? And at that point, that kind of made sense, because if something so horrific as a bomb explosion happens, then those are the kinds of questions that the cops are supposed to be asking, right, to figure out what went on here. So, I told them they live up in Mendocino in Humboldt County, and, I was at a meeting with them last night, but I was asking them, you were there at the scene. What happened? What happened? What exploded? Why did it explode? How did this unfold? And they were not really forthcoming with information, but after a pretty short time, and before anybody else got to the hospital, they said, well, it was kind of chaotic up here. Why don't we go downstairs so that we can talk in a more quiet area? And they were pretty insistent, and I went downstairs with them, which for what I thought would be just a few minutes. And then they were still questioning me a little bit about Judi and Darryl, but what I said to them, because I didn't really have any information to give them, even if I had wanted to, but I said, you're Oakland cops. I found out pretty shortly after that the FBI was there too, but it was the Oakland cops that talked to me first. And I said, you're down here, these people are from Mendocino and Humboldt counties, and you probably don't know, but, we have this campaign going on up there to preserve the forest, and it's become a very politically hot situation, and people have been assaulted, people have been getting death threats. In particular, these two people who it appears somebody just tried to kill, and those death threats and other violence have been very recently, like in the last few weeks, have been increasing in frequency and intensity. So what this looks like to me, without knowing anything else, is that this is kind of the culmination of that. Therefore, your job is to go and follow that trail, because this is going on not here in Alameda County, but in Mendocino and Humboldt County, and what you need to do is run up there and start trying to figure out who put this bomb in the car while that trail is still hot. And that was the first time that things were horrific, but then things were seeming a little weird because they seemed kind of, they just kind of brushed off that information. I thought that I was giving them real information that they didn't know, and it's like, yeah, well, but when were you born? What's your birth date? When were you born? And what's your address? And I just blew up, and I said, how in the world can that be relevant when there's two people that somebody just tried to kill? And, you know, I'm done. I'm not talking to you guys anymore. I just gave you the only information, the only relevant information that I could give you. So I'm going to go back upstairs and try and find out the state of my friend who's in surgery. And they said, no, you're not going to go back upstairs quite yet. We have some more questions. And so basically they were detaining me. And in a moment when they were actually talking to each other, and Carol was still with me too at that point, I saw that we were in an administrator's office, and it's like, aha, a phone. And
Yes.
so I picked up the phone and I called Kelpie at my house, and I said, okay, this is really bizarre, but you know, this is what's going on, and the cops are being again, I won't put those words on the video, but the cops are being really weird, and I think we need to I think we need to bring some lawyers in. They said, you know, in the file cabinet, there's a file folder that's labeled Law Dogs, and in that file folder is names and phone numbers of lawyers, and they were lawyers from the Golden Gate Bridge action, so they were people that we had talked to recently. And I said, you know, just start calling them and tell them, you know, that I'm here talking to the cops, and they won't give us information about our friends, and we need some help. And also, you know, start calling people. And actually, Carol found another phone too, and she called one of our other Earth First people and said, you know, start calling people. This just happened. And that was kind of the, you know, the first round of how people in the Bay Area started converging on the hospital. So all of this was playing out over a period of time. It was probably down there at least an hour, probably somewhat more, and the whole time I was trying to go back upstairs, and they wouldn't let me. And so it's like the middle of the afternoon, and then they said, well, we're actually going to take you downtown. And why? And well, you know, because we can do that, because we can. And I said, well, you know, I don't want to go downtown. I want to go back upstairs. And from my understanding, there's people up there now, and who are my friends, and I need to go up and talk to people and figure all this out. And it's like, no, downtown, no. And I asked them if they were arresting me, and they said, well, not right this minute, but if you don't go downtown, then we will arrest you, and then you'll go downtown. And what I was thinking is we hardly need like somebody else arrested in jail that, you know, then can't get out of jail without bail or lawyers or something. So they put us in, me and Carol, in the cop car, let us sit there for a while, and then took us down to the Oakland police station. And but what was kind of funny was, because I had at that point been labeled uncooperative, once we got to the Oakland police station, they didn't really question me anymore. They parked us in a locked room and just left us there for 2 hours. I mean, it was a long period of time. And so again, we found a phone. And I called KPFA news department. And, you know, all these times we're trying to get the word out while knowing nothing. It's, you know, it was a pretty tricky question as to how do we frame this. But anyway, we did the best we could, and when I called KPFA, they said, okay, we'll put you on. By then, it was almost the time for the evening news. It had been that long that they had been holding me. And meanwhile, you know, there were people at the hospital, there were people at the police station. And unbeknownst to me, the whole time I was asking for a lawyer, and they were uncooperative in that respect. They just ignored the fact that I was asking for a lawyer. Meanwhile, there was a lawyer, Diana Bullock, I believe, downstairs at the Oakland police station asking to get in to see me. She had my name, she had all the information, and they didn't tell me she was down there, and they wouldn't let her in. So, anyway, Mark Miracle at KPFA put me on the news live, and I think that that was also a key moment because KPFA has a huge audience, that it was key in getting the word out. And so, you know, even more people came and converged at that point. And eventually they released me with, you know, no more questions and no explanation, no more information from them. And it was Lieutenant Mike Sims who walked me down the hallway when they were releasing us, and so we were chatting, and the whole time I had also been asking about Darryl, because I had gotten enough information at the hospital. I mean, nobody was going to get to see Judi or find out more about her for a while because she was in emergency surgery. But I did get the information that Darryl was being treated in the ER and was not being admitted. So I kept asking, when is Darryl going to get out of the ER? When can we go get him? And got no answers. And so I was asking Mike Sims as we were walking down the hallway, what about Darryl? It's been hours. You know, I assume the ER has treated him. Why is he still there? And they said that the cops were talking to him, questioning him. Okay, when are you going to be done? And, you know, he was just in a car that was bombed. I think that, you know, there should be a friend on the other side of the door when he gets out of the ER and gets done talking to the cops. And so, well, you know, we're going to continue with that. And Mike Sims made the mistake of giving me his card with his direct line. And he said, well, just call me later, which I did call him at least on the hour, every hour, all night. And it was actually, I mean, just to jump ahead for a second, it was, and they kept saying, call back in half an hour, call back in half an hour. And it was at 4:45 a.m. that they said, Mike Sims said, well, you actually can't come get him because we're putting him under arrest. And so we were there for the night. When I finally went downstairs, there were a lot of people there because there was no information to be gotten at the hospital. There were still some people at the hospital, but, you know, the focus had kind of shifted to the police department because, you know, they were holding Darryl, they were holding our people, Seeds of Peace they brought in. They had already searched Seeds of Peace house and were questioning them. I mean, they were in the police station the same time as I was, and I had no idea. And by then, Pam was there, I think. But there were all these people in the police lobby, and we took over the lobby and, you know, did this circle and singing and talking. And And we also, there was a bank of payphones in the police station lobby that we just totally took over. And, people were just, we just widened the circles and just started calling everybody involved in Redwood Summer, people in Mendocino and Humboldt County, everybody involved in North First, and so people really started pouring in, so that, by the morning there were a lot of people there, including a lot of people who would come from out of town because of all these phone calls. Who needs cell phones? I mean, we did it, and really, the timing wasn't that different than it would have been, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But we don't need the internet, but anyway, we went downstairs and people are hanging out, and ultimately, I got locked out because I left to get something from my car, and then they locked the door and I couldn't get back in, and then that started happening to other people. So ultimately, they cleared the lobby, and so people were outside and they stayed, but we didn't have access to phones, and there was press around, but not a whole lot once it got to be night, but we knew that there would be press in the morning. So we said, okay, we've got to figure out what we're going to say. We've got to write a press release. So we, in order to, what was it, 3 people, 4 people, in order to remove ourselves from the chaos at the police station so that we could write a press release, we rented a very seedy motel room across the street and stayed up all night and called Mike Sims and wrote a press release. Longhand, laptops, of course. We just chose the person with the neatest handwriting, and then somebody, before dawn, took it out to an all-night copy place and made copies, and then we greeted press in the morning. So I think I can put it there.
Karen Pickett.
I'll just say that I wasn't the one with the neat handwriting. Wow, so I'm
Pam Davis.
Oh, thank you. As I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about the tension building in the days and weeks before all this happening, and the meeting with the loggers, which was the day before, I believe.
2 days.
2 days before the bombing, and just navigating that amazing experience of working with the community, working with the very diverse viewpoints, to put it mildly, but the tension, and this increasing file folder of threats, death threats, phone calls, just mounting all this, and I was at the Seeds of Peace meeting the night before as well, and yeah, it definitely was kind of this climactic thing where all these pieces came together, and it was like this. It was clearly this commitment that we were going to move forward with this thing. I went home that night. I got, I remember standing in my kitchen when I got a phone call from Anna Marie Stenberg saying something emotional that I couldn't quite get. It was like, it's a bomb. They've been bombed, and I'm like, who? I had to extricate information. It's like that all the pieces kind of started coming together, and I don't remember exactly where my kids were, but I left shortly thereafter and went down to Highland Hospital, and I talked to somebody. I don't know if it was before Karen had been taken away, or but I spoke to somebody and they said, oh, they already know that I'm not her sister, so you say that you're the sister. And of course they asked me what her birth date was, which I didn't know. And so I wasn't well suited for that, wasn't well prepared for that. But, we get down there and there's sheer chaos. We don't have any idea what's going on. Judi, it's clear we're wondering. We have no idea. We know that she's very seriously wounded. Didn't know, initially what the status for Darryl was, and just, shell shock. I mean, literally shell shock. The FBI was on hand at the hospital, and whoever it was I'd spoken to, because I talked to Anna Marie, but then I don't know if I talked to Betty or somebody else after that, and either somebody suggested or I thought to bring the file folder of death threats down. And so I had copies of almost everything and went down to the hospital, and the FBI is in the room, in the lobby, and I went up and I said, hey, it's we at that point I think we knew that it was a bomb. And I'm like, hey, I have this really important information I want to share with you. And so it's but as has been stated, they're not, they weren't looking at doing an investigation. They were looking at these people as suspects already. So I provided them with the death threats, which they pretty much weren't that interested in. I gave them my name and number, and but it was like the disinterest was palpable. It was really shameful. And so we were I was at the hospital for a while. At some point, went down to the police station, which was just this growing, amazing crowds of people. And I imagining it was the next day greeting the press, right? Just these massive media interest, all sorts of look around us, the folks that we work with, live with, play with, do political work with. It was that entire amazing body of people. I'd forgotten about the circle in the police lobby. It was a pretty big lobby.
Great acoustics.
And very good acoustics. Yeah. So, and I'm not sure what else to add about that day. What I recall, in the days following was coming back up to Sonoma County. I don't remember how many days I was down in the city. It seemed like I was down there for 2-3 nights. I don't remember. But coming up to Sonoma County, and I'm not even sure how it all came together, but we had this pretty spontaneous rally at Courthouse Square where hundreds of people showed up, and I'm sure that happened in other communities as well. But, I remember standing on this, concrete bollard or something, and, there's like a couple hundred people there who are just mortified by, and already have, their signs. But just, and everybody was hungry for information, it was like so, anyway, I think it was all, a lot of it's a blur, there was just so much going on, and there was so much shock about it. And I was thinking, Darryl said something which I don't recall offhand, but it reminded me about, being with Judi in her car up in Redwood Valley, driving somewhere, and and just the tension was mounting. We were Redwood Summer was more than just a pipe dream at that point, and her saying something about sabotage and how she would never be able to participate in anything like that because there was going to be too much scrutiny on her. And it just it's like I thought about that later, and she knew that she couldn't participate in that kind of stuff, and the very notion that she would, have a bomb in her car is just, not, well, we know that's not true anyway, but anyway. So I don't think I have any more to add to that, but it was definitely, as you said, all of our realities changed on that day. So thank you.
There is kind of an iconic picture of you holding the picture of the rifle scope and crosshairs over Judy's face. I think David Cross might have taken that picture. I am not sure. Or it might have been a newspaper. I think it was David. But how much did you do press work that day on May 24th? I mean, were you talking to the press?
Myself, me?
At the Oakland police station, yeah.
Yeah, I think the next day. I don't remember speaking to folks that night.
Right.
I do recall. I mean, I know, having seen some videos following that. I mean, there's some video of me speaking to the press, and I believe that we, provided them as well with some of the death threats. Talked about some of the death threats too. And yeah, definitely was talking to the press. Was with Karen while I think Karen did the yeoman's work of the press release. But yeah, we were definitely facing the giant cameras. You don't know they're so big until they're in your face. Yeah.
Excuse me. I probably won't have an opportunity to say this next week, and let me just do a little advertisement for next week while I'm at it, that, actually not next week, this Sunday. This Sunday, the 24th of October, is our last day of this exhibit, although I really feel there should be a massive letter writing campaign to extend it for another year or two.
Yeah.
This is going to be up to the 31st?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Now I do. So next week will this Sunday will be the timber worker organizing feature that Judi Bari and I and others such as Naomi and many others were engaged in. In fact, as I forget what Pam mentioned, I think just 2 days before the bombing, there was a big timber boss, Earth First meeting in Willits at right on Commercial, as a matter of fact, just up the street from here. And so this was something Judi really specialized in, because Judi was blue collar. She was also a union organizer, and she worked. She was in charge of a 6-man construction crew, and she called herself a foreman. Even though she was a feminist, she that was her go-to word. She said, "I'm a foreman over California yurts, doing complicated construction for David Raitt, as a matter of fact." I was going somewhere with this.
The timber worker.
Yes, this Sunday. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's all right. We're all of an age.
This Sunday is the timber worker organizing panel featuring Ernie Pardini, Art Harwood, Walter Smith, who is an independent contractor here from Willits as well as Naomi Wagner, Steve Ongerth from the IWW, and myself. And so that should be a really great way to conclude it, building bridges, because I think in this time of polarization of both the United States and the world, it's not a bad time to look at how we can find what we prefer to call common ground, not middle ground, but common ground, and try to, bring down the temperature. And what Judi Bari led in terms of this organizing of with timber workers, I think sets a really profound example. And we're going to have 3 timber workers here this coming Sunday from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So that's important. That's our last event. Except there is a book, online Zoom, isn't there, of Judi Bari's Timber Wars, which we also have for sale over here?
Yes, on the 27th, with Deb Bader Sampson, she'll be leading the book talk. She's our Director of Cultural Services.
That information is on the museum website, is it not? The Mendocino County Museum, which is part of the Mendocino County website. So if you just type in Mendocino County Museum, you'll eventually get to that link, and then you'll find out how to zoom in to that. But what I wanted to say was it was Special Agent Phil Sena who was the first person to accuse me of being guilty. We can tell this is your bomb. But sometime after the trial, not long after the trial, it was brought to my attention, and I'm going to keep this brief because it's actually quite a long story, but I'm going to keep it very brief. And maybe at some point we can do a radio show or something about this. That Special Agent Phil Sena himself was working with a pipe bomber in San Francisco just a year and a half before the bombing. The pipe bomber was an informant being used to catch a cop killer in Mexico. That this pipe bomber had a pipe. This guy used to rob banks with pipe bombs, believe it or not. And his bank robbing buddy had killed a cop and escaped to Mexico, so they used this pipe bomber in San Francisco to find him. James Burkhart was the man's name. And so all I want to say, to keep it short, is that, and then James Burkhart, the pipe bomber, testified in the trial against the cop killer in Boston, by the way. She testified against him the next year. So in 1989, just shortly before the bombing, we know that Special Agent Phil Sena was working with a pipe bomber / informant in San Francisco, and one of the FBI's historical go-tos for doing their dirty work is to use their informants to kill people. And the most notorious example of this, of course, is Whitey Bulger from the Boston mob, who was allowed to assassinate many, many people as long as he informed to the FBI, and they knew it. So I'm not saying that James Burkhart is the bomber, but what I am saying is that we do know, and by the way, the reason I know this is because it was on the FBI files on the Discovery Channel. And I have since gone and researched the actual newspaper articles. I have court transcripts of the trial, and one more little fascinating thing. Even though this was just two kind of oddball bank robbers who would like tie up the guards with pipe bombs and then rob the bank, things like that, they gave him a new identity after the trial. They gave him witness protection, which they usually only do for the mob. But now we are not going to be able to find James Burkhart as of shortly after the bombing. So just saying that that's another lead that we have, and I want to say it here in public for video because I haven't really told this story very much, and it's an important story, important component that needs to be told. With that said, I'd like to open this up to Q&A, or for that matter, if you have a story that you want to share about the day of the bombing. And in fact, if you do, I want to ask two things of you. One, give permission if you don't mind being videoed. Say out loud that you give permission to be videoed, so that the museum has your permission. We also have some permission slips up at the table, I think, do we, Karen? In case, because we are videoing this, Daniela, who's an amazing filmmaker, who happens to be staying with me through the WOOF program, the Willing Workers on Organic Farms program. Her sister WOOFed, and now she's here. And I'm actually making a movie with her about something totally different right now. But the point is, she is an amazing videographer, and these are being uploaded to the museum website as well as to YouTube. So if anybody wants to come up, please give permission, or if you don't, just say so. And if you want, come up to the front and ask your question on mic if you like. So do we have anybody who would like to add a question or comment about the day of the bombing?
I'm sorry. My youngest daughter and Judy's youngest daughter were wheeled around to many, many demonstrations in their strollers. So they grew up together. They're still very good friends. But that morning, Mike had brought his youngest daughter, their youngest daughter, over to my house. And the girls were playing in the other room. I got a phone call from Emily Fry, who was actually living on the Fry Ranch in Redwood Valley at the time. And she said, "Edie, have you heard the news?" I said, "What news?" She said, "Judi Bari, she's been bombed. Turn on the radio." I said, What station?" "KGO, turn on KGO." So I rushed to the radio, I turned on KGO, and I'm listening to this horrible story about my dear friend Judy, and suddenly I realize, oh, I have to turn off the radio because her daughter's in the next room. And she's, I don't know, 4 or 5, they were pretty young, they were still in strollers. So several hours later, actually maybe an hour later, I get a call from Mike Sweeney, the father. And he says, "Edie, I'm coming to pick up Jessica." I said, "Well, Mike, do you know if Judy's gonna live or die?" He said, "No, we don't know, she's in surgery right now." I said, "Well, Mike, leave her here until you find out, and then you can come and get her." And believe it or not, Mike Sweeney listened to me, and he let her stay, and he picked her up later. So that's my story of the day of the bombing.
Thank you.
And thank you, Edie Morris. Edie Morris, do we have your permission to use this on video?
You bet.
Thank you so much. Edie Morris sang with Judi. In fact, the actual real time I first met Judi was when she was singing with Edie Morris in Ukiah at a benefit. Bill Oliver was the headliner. I was opening for Bill, and Edie and Judi were opening for the whole show. And that was 1987. I believe it was December. But I really met her through you, babe. Somebody else like to come up? Or ask a question? Tell a story? Here we go. If you stand a little bit toward the middle, we'll get more light on you. And do we have your permission to be on video?
The day that Judi was bombed, I think it was 3 days before I was the director of Planned Parenthood here in Ukiah, and Judi had been out protecting me. She and Mike Sweeney used to walk me to my car 2 in the morning after the clinics, and she had been out helping because we had a lot of protesters out there, and they had been threatening us. And so the day of the bombing, and I think it was Mike Sweeney and Susan Jordan immediately called me and said, "What's the name of that guy who was threatening you with bombs?" And it was Bill Staley. And so I started researching where he was, where he lived, what his background was, and I was unable to be part of the protest or speak much because I was the director of Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood was asking me to stay out of it. And so, and the day of the bombing, I was in Oakland in my office and got that information and went to the steps of the police station.
Thank you. That's really amazing. Do we have your permission to be on video? Yes, thank you. Sorry, just want to be sure. About Planned Parenthood, first of all, I don't think we've ever met, and I was with Judi that day on November 27th, 1988, when we did do the Planned Parenthood protest, where we sang songs to abort fascism by. But that was a very significant day because photographs of that there's legions of there's many, many photographs of that event, the protest at Planned Parenthood. And I will say that I've probably been the principal investigator of who bombed Judi Bari. And one of the leads I took was this. The envelope that took credit for the bombing was signed by the envelope and the letter. Let me rewind. The letter was signed by the Lord's Avenger and claimed that he bombed Judi because of her protest at the Planned Parenthood clinic, as well as leading the honest men of the woods astray, as her paganism festered. And she wasn't a pagan, she was an atheist, but that's a whole other story, okay? But the DNA on that letter that took credit for the bombing, that described that bomb under her car to the T, with the color of the wires, the twist of the wires, the brand of the battery, the pocket watch, the works, the size of the pipe, the type of explosives, plus a second bomb that happened 2 weeks earlier at the Cloverdale Mill, which is a whole other story as well. But that DNA was that of an unknown female. So, not super long ago, about 3 years ago, I started to look, just because we don't want to follow all the leads. I went and started looking at, women who might have decided to blow up Judi, just in case. And sure enough, maybe a name that you know, was Shelley Shannon, who had shot 2 doctors that had performed abortions, and by the way is probably still currently in a federal prison in Florida, I believe. And so then I went and researched her history, and she was in jail in Georgia just 2 weeks before the Planned Parenthood clinic. And then she got out. She lived in Grants Pass, and so she was traveling home to Southern Oregon. And then I went through all the photographs of everybody who was at that clinic, and we pretty much have everybody there. And there's one woman who could be Shelley Shannon, but might not be. It's really hard to tell. I can't make a conclusive ID on it. But I just want to point out that we actually have gone down that route to see if it might have legitimately been somebody who, but we don't think it was. We think that letter was a red herring and a disinformation piece. But nevertheless, because you were from Planned Parenthood, and I thought I would share with you that I did go down that route. And then I went to the Mendocino County Sheriff's, Lieutenant Shannon Barty, who has since retired, and asked him, because we have an open case with the Mendocino County Sheriff's, can we go ahead and get Shelley Shannon's DNA, because she's in prison, and compare it to the Lord's Avenger DNA, which we have. And he said that we can't do anything with the FBI because if we go against what the FBI wants, we have to work with the FBI on a regular basis, and so we can't investigate we can't do this. And so there's a wall there in which no law enforcement agency wants to go up against, it wants to take on a case that the FBI is blockading to this day. So just want to make that little story.
Even though there are no suspects except you and Judy.
Yeah. Somebody asked me, do I think the FBI bombed us? And I always said, well, I don't know if they bombed us or not, but they act like they did. All right, so somebody else like to come up? Yeah, I'm talking about bomb school, but that's like, the greatest hits of the bombing story, you know.
Right, yeah. Yeah, well, there was bomb school, and we have a DVD, very poor quality, but a DVD, who was it that said,
Frank. It was Special Agent Frank Doyle, the head of the terrorism division.
said, this is it, this is the final exam.
The teacher of bomb school was Frank Doyle. There's a definite connection between Louisiana Pacific and the FBI. And it starts at bomb school 30 days before the bombing. While we are busy, while Greg King and company are busy climbing the Golden Gate Bridge on April 24th, 1990, the FBI is up in Eureka at College of the Redwoods, which has a police academy, blowing up the insides of cars with pipe bombs in something called bomb school. It's a police course. And it's taught by Special Agent Frank Doyle, who was the guy who showed up to the scene of the bomb car and blamed us for bombing ourselves. He was the guy who turned the whole thing on us. And so Frank Doyle was there, but why did the FBI wind up in Eureka? Because they had a place to blow up cars, which was a Louisiana Pacific clear cut that was offered to him by his friend, Chief of LP Security, Frank Wigginton. Frank and Frank. Frank Wigginton hosted Frank Doyle. And Frank Wigginton was a former Humboldt sheriff, and Frank were friends from the the explosives circle that they have, And so there they are, blowing up cars right in the heat of the organizing of Redwood Summer, and also in the whole wake of the FBI having done a big sting operation against Earth First in Arizona in 1988, and then again this big arrest of 7 Earth Firsters in Montana in 1989, one of whom is now, the head of the Bureau of Land Management? Yeah, very good. We've come a long way, baby.
And it wasn't Frank Wigginton, was he the LP security chief when we did the press release about not spiking trees? Or is that?
Yeah, Frank Wigginton was at a lot of our protests. I can't recall whether he was there specifically.
Yeah, well, it was a specific press release. It was press conference. It wasn't a protest, but yeah, we were basically saying, hey, we recognize that that's not a tactic that works in this area because of the private ownership of the land, et cetera. But yeah, he was.
So Frank and Frank are talking. They're yucking it up about Earth First. They're yucking it up about blowing up cars. And then 2 weeks after bomb school, a bomb goes off at a Louisiana Pacific sawmill. So you got LP bomb school, LP sawmill gets bombed. So there's a thread between Louisiana Pacific and the first bombing. And the first bombing was taken credit for by the same individual who took credit for bombing Judy's car and described both bombs accurately. So we know that the bomber was responsible for both bombs. And so now you have LP bomb school, bomb at LP mill. And then 2 weeks later, bomb at Judy's car, teacher of bomb school, over there at the car with one of his bomb school students from the Oakland police, and he turns to him and says, "This is it, don't you think? This is the final exam." Now, Frank Doyle denied saying that, but he went on to become a guest, he made guest appearances on Mythbusters. A lot of, and I got them all. I downloaded them from Amazon. I know more about how Frank Doyle sounds than I ever care to admit. And I can guarantee you that it was Frank Doyle who said, "This is it, this is the final exam." And the fact that he lied about it is significant also. Frank Doyle was also the guy in trial, Special Agent Frank Doyle, who was asked about something he had said in a deposition. I don't remember what it was, but his response was to die for. He was asked if he had said something back in when he was deposed in the 1990s, and Frank Doyle said, "Well, if I knew then what I know now, I would have said I don't recall." That made the quote board, which we had. So yes, so bomb school was a definite clue. I mean, there's a lot of evidence in this case. The female DNA in the Lord's Avenger. We have a police informant letter, and a death threat, which are typed in the same typewriter with the same DNA that has Irv Sutley family DNA on it, typed with the typewriter that came out of the Sonoma County Peace and Justice Center, which I have in my possession, by the way, a manual. It's still in my storage locker. And, but that doesn't mean that Irv Sutley, activist in Sonoma County, was the bomber. I believe that a lot of people played a role in this, and they may not have known what the actual outcome was going to be. There could have been the disinformationists. There could have been, the person who built the bomb but didn't put it in the car. And if you take a look at the female DNA on the Lord's Avenger letter, if we just for a moment say, okay, it was not a woman who bombed Judi, well, that means it was a man. That means there's two people, not one. It's two, at least. So I do believe this is an authentic conspiracy of a number of people who were targeting Judi Bari. That's my opinion, and there's hard evidence and quite a bit of DNA and fingerprints and typewriter samples to prove it. But we can only go so far without some law enforcement agency that can issue a search warrant and bang down the door and test DNA. There's a wall there that, what am I going to go over to the pipe bomber's house and say, by the way, who has a new identity, and say, excuse me, sir, Mr. Pipe Bomber, did you bomb Judi Bari? No. Should I write a letter to prison in Boston to his bank robbing buddy and say, hey, Mr. Ted Osuki, who is the guy who killed the cop, do you know if your buddy, James Burkhart, bombed Judi Bari? It's scary stuff. Not something you're not going to dive into if you're not a cop. So that's just a little world according to Darryl in terms of who bombed Judi Bari. But there is certainly a mountain of evidence.
Can I add to conspiracy theories?
That's not a conspiracy theory, by the way.
No.
That is a theory.
Notions. The day that Judi and Darryl were on, Frank Wigington, who's headquartered up in Humboldt County and sometimes even in Oregon, where they have their headquarters, was down at the LP Warren, the offices in Calcutta, the day that Judi was bombed. When he finds out, and he's sitting there in the office, and somebody calls him, and he finds out, and one of the workers there, one of the office workers there, passes the office, and they hear Frank Wigington say, what took them so long?
Mm. Well, without, and I hear that, and I believe that, but without actual names, it's hearsay.
Well, I'm glad you knew the name.
Sure. But even that. Would anybody else like to speak? And do we have your permission to use you on video, Beth? Thank you. That was a yes.
Darryl, can you tell us more about this guy that was a pipe bomber who is now, he's like got a what do they call it, a witness protection thing, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And he lives someplace far away up in the mountains.
We have no idea where he lives. James Burkhart.
Yeah. What do we know about him?
What I said, that he used to rob banks with Ted Osuki, and they were busted for robbing banks with pipe bombs. They go across the street to the sheriff's office, tie them up, strap pipe bombs to them. This is all in the news. This is all verifiable. Plus, it was on the Discovery Channel. And then they got busted, and they went their separate ways. Ted Osuki went to Boston and was in a transient house when that was raided by the police, and that's when he killed a cop. They weren't even looking for him, but he thought they were looking for him, so he killed a cop, which was a very tragic incident. And then he escaped. He ran out of Boston. He called his old bank robbing buddy, James Burkhart, in San Francisco, and he asked James, can you help me get rid of my car, and can you help me get rid of the murder weapon? And keep in mind, this is the day of no cell phones, and so his long-distance phone records led the cops right to San Francisco. But in the meantime, they met somewhere in the Midwest. Osuki met James Burkhart, at which point Burkhart drove Osuki's car into a river somewhere, and then took the murder weapon, and James Burkhart took the murder weapon and gave it to his father as a birthday present. This is, I don't make this stuff up, okay? And then Burkhart went back. And then Burkhart went back to San Francisco after helping Osuki escape to Mexico, and that's when Special Agent Phil Sena shows up to his door in San Francisco and says, "We know that you helped Osuki escape. We know that he trusts you, so we want you to help us catch him." That's what I know. I don't think I even have a picture of him. Because in the FBI files, they use fake names. Phil Sena came on in Flesh and Blood and used his real name, but they changed the name of the suspect, of the bank robber, James Burkhart. So what I did was I went to Boston.com, the Boston Globe newspaper. I looked up what cop got killed in 1988, and then followed the arrest sequence and found the name James Burkhart, his real name. It wasn't that hard. Did a little bit of research, and that's how I got his name.
Was Sena at bomb school?
Excuse me?
Was Sena at bomb school?
Phil Sena was not at bomb school to our knowledge. Special Agent Frank Doyle was. But what is interesting is that both two of our defendants that we beat in the lawsuit, Special Agent Frank Doyle and Special Agent Phil Sena, both went on to have television careers on the Discovery Channel. What are the odds?
You knew somebody. Darryl, could you talk about how, like, in the court case, it seemed like all the bomb guys, even our bomb guy, there's like a little, it's like a fellowship of bomb guys or something. They all know each other, and it was really creepy, I thought. The few things I overheard going on and stuff. And what did you find about that? Maybe talk about our bomb guy.
Too long ago. Somebody else remembers. I remember a lot of stuff, but I have to go back and look at the
You don't
notes.
remember our bomb guy?
I don't remember him super well. But we had a lot of witnesses.
Right.
We took well over 100 depositions before trial.
He would have had Howard Zinn, but he got blocked.
Anybody else?
Well, I am probably one of the few people that doesn't remember where they were when Judi got bombed, and I don't even remember how I heard about it, but obviously I did. I think I was up in Humboldt County doing actions up there, and as is my wont, I just went into denial. I just went, nope, it's not happening. And not that it didn't happen, but I just didn't have an emotional reaction to it. I have a very delayed reaction to things like that, and I just went, we gotta keep going. And I knew that there were a lot of people in the city, in the Bay Area with Judi. I knew that she was being well taken care of, as much as she could be. And I just felt like we have to keep up the actions. That's the best thing that we can do for Judi, other than being right with her. We just need to keep doing actions. And I was incredibly energized by that. Somehow, I just like, some kind of spirit entered me, and we just went crazy in Humboldt and Mendocino County. We just did actions like mad. And I think some of you that have been here for the different events, heard about how active we were and how crazy Redwood Summer was. And people got arrested like once, twice, 3 times in a day, practically. That was just the other side of it, the part that wasn't in the city, that wasn't doing the press, that wasn't at the hospital. And of course, we knew that they were trying to intimidate us and break up the movement by attacking Judi. I don't think any of us ever thought that Judi or Darryl would be carrying a bomb. It just wasn't credible in the slightest. But all the things that you've been saying, I've heard a lot of them, parts of them or pieces of them over the years, and it's really brought it together. So I really thank you all so much for for doing this and for putting all these pieces together and refreshing our memories. And I also thank you because of the effort, for all the effort that you made that I'm sure helped Judi stay alive. And that now, as we're still organizing and still active out in the forest in Jackson State and other places that we need to be, we really, I feel like we're kind of, I don't want to speak too loud here, but we're kind of free of the FBI. We're free of, I mean, they're probably here somewhere. I see you over there. But we're not compared to how compared to how it was in the what Betty was talking about, the weirdos coming into the MEC, there was a spate of videographers from LA that didn't have any other connections, and we were just like, we were very infiltrated. And we're not feeling that now. I mean, now they just have to attack us outright with bogus security in Soda Gulch in Jackson Forest. But really, I really credit all of your efforts with that protection that we're now enjoying. And if y'all want to get involved in what's happening now, there's a sign-up sheet. It's nonviolence training, but basically it just puts you on a list and you'll get information about Jackson Forest and the campaign that's still going on there. And Viva Judi, as she's still inspiring us.
It's 7:30 and it's time to wrap up. I do want to suggest that you go over to the tables. In particular, Friends of the Mendocino County Museum has been raising money to do things like putting some of our guests up who've traveled a long way and don't really want to travel back at night. So we're going to put up Karen Pickett at a motel tonight, and we're going to pay for Betty Ball's airfare from Denver, Colorado, the Betty Ball Fund. And we're also covering our videographer expenses. Very, very modest expenses, but we are covering some of those. And so Brent Walker over there has been really super duper helpful in making that happen. And then also I've got a little swag table over there, as does Karen Pickett from Bay Area Earth First and the Bay Area Coalition for Headwaters, where she's got some shirts and I've got some books and music, and also have the Who Bombed Judi Bari DVD. And at my table, everything is donation, including for free. Okay, so you can go over there and take out what you want and have at it. And I really, again, have to thank Karen Matson, the curator of the Mendocino County Museum, who's here. I actually started calling the museum shortly after I made the Who Bombed Judi Bari movie, and on the 25th anniversary of the bombing, which would have been 2005, I believe. No, 2015. Thank you very much. And then I've been just calling them once a year, and then finally, Karen Matson called me back. And I don't know if she called me back or she was just ready to call and without my prompting, but I'd been lobbying the museum for a long time, and she said, how about the 30th anniversary, which was last year? I was like, yeah, hallelujah. And then we got delayed by the pandemic, and then Karen said, we're doing it this year, no matter what, it's going to happen. So thank you, Karen Matson, for this wonderful job. Permanent fixture here at the Mendocino County Museum for us to, I'm kidding, of course. But I would like to go down to Oakland Museum, and Karen and I talked about possibly, getting in touch with some other curators, some other museums. There's different museums we can possibly go to. So let's see if you have any ideas, please let us know. And then also I want to thank Bill Simpich for getting this back to me. Our founding attorney, and you're certainly welcome to check out. You can see the seat and how it was just blown up from the bottom, and how they said it was in the back seat. I almost brought the back seat with me. I have it at my place. Some mint condition. It's like sterling condition. They said the back seat was where the bomb was, and this is the seat where it was.
There's some dog hair in it.
Yeah, duh. So thank you, Pam Davis, Karen Pickett, Betty, wonderful ball. And Danny for the video, and Trinity for helping out with the logistics here.
And Darryl for...
And Trinity for coming to the 6 a.m. blockade in Soda Gulch.
That's right. The forest defenders are pirating my woofers, and that's okay. They have my blessing. Sometimes they have my car, but they always have my blessing. Thank you, everybody. We'll mingle a little bit. Oh.